The Mediterranean was the first major body of water to be used for large-scale trade. This was true for both the Bronze Age and during classical antiquity. Why the Mediterranean has this position and why maritime trade and connections developed here can be deduced from its Latin name mare internum, the inner sea. The Mediterranean is completely surrounded by land, aside from the small opening at Gibraltar. And this is important. When sailing the Mediterranean, you are going somewhere. The seafaring of the Mediterranean was dominated by the Phoenicians and Greeks, later Greco-Romans. Of the two, the Greeks established more settlements, although the Phoenicians did establish Carthage. But the Greeks established more, which in time made them important for the very reason of going somewhere. When setting sail, you usually must have a destination, and if you go to trade, it is nice to have a colony of like-minded to sail to and trade with. The colony then trades with the inland, and the ship trades with the colony. It reduces quite a bit of the risk involved when sailing out to trade. Indeed, Plato stated that the Greek were around the Mediterranean like frogs around a pond. That the Greeks would evolve to this position has a lot to do with Greece itself. The Aegean Sea is in many ways a miniature of the larger Mediterranean around it. The coastline is largely made up of rugged terrain and there are many natural harbors. The valleys and low-lying areas are separated by mountains that are not easily traversed, especially not if you bring large volumes of goods. This makes the sea the natural means by which to transport goods. This is further exacerbated by the large number of islands. The Mediterranean is also surrounded by mountainous areas or deserts to the south and also has many natural harbors. This makes it well suited for maritime transport between areas that are otherwise not easily accessible. This both holds true when traveling to trade goods with already existing settlements, like when the Greeks visited Egypt, or for going to unsettled territory to build new towns, which the Greeks did as the Aegean was settled. What further made the Mediterranean excellent for trade and settlement is that it straddles the same latitudes, making much of the land similar. This meant that the same cultural know-how could be used when settling new shores, and just as important, the ships did not need to be adapted to other conditions than those found in the Mediterranean. So, the Greeks came to dominate shipping in the Mediterranean due to their extensive settlements and the fact that their homeland was also heavily dependent on maritime activity, and this dependence also explains why the Greeks made their network of settlements. They simply had to. The Phoenicians became excellent traders because they were situated at the very center of the Bronze Age trade routes with Egypt to the south. It was a massive benefit to them to trade up and down the coast of the Levant, and due to transport by ship being much cheaper, than over land. It was only natural for this trade system to emerge. The Greeks, however, were originally at the outskirts of the Bronze Age trade system and later on isolated from the Persian Empire that the Phoenicians serviced. But the Greeks needed to trade simply because Greece could not support its own population. The Egyptians did not need to send population abroad because Egypt could feed its own population and the Phoenician population too. The Greeks, however, were heavily dependent on import of grain from colonies by the Black Sea or from Egypt. So the Greek shipping system and colonies were a question of needs. They both needed imports of food and a place to settle their population surplus. The grain need could be covered by Egypt, which received Greek olive oil and pottery in exchange, but since the Greeks had the need the most, they were the ones that came to trade, which they did by ship. The population surplus was mostly sent to areas that wasn't already that populated, which meant west to Italy and the coasts of the western Mediterranean and north to the Black Sea, which had the added bonus of giving access to an alternate source of grain as the inland population was willing to trade grain and other goods for Greek products. This way, the Greek settlements became intermediaries for Greek trade, resulting in a network of port cities in natural ports similar to those in the homeland. What the Greeks to a large extent did was build a trade network from the bottom up. They did, like the Phoenicians, trade with the old established civilizations, but to a larger extent the Greeks established themselves where there was little trade basis beforehand. Their settlements drew in trade from areas that had been isolated before the establishment of a Greek colony, and thus they grew the trade and connectivity across the Mediterranean as a side effect of dealing with their homeland's inability to deal with their surplus population. This would be further extended with the Hellenistic period, where Egypt and the Levant were also Hellenized and reached its peak with the Greco-Roman period, where the Phoenician competition ended with the fall of Carthage. The Roman Empire built itself largely on the basis of the Greek system of ports and improved upon the natural ports by also building docks in opus caementitium, also known as Roman concrete. This shows how the costly endeavor that the building of ships is, to a large extent, is a result of a need in the society that builds the ship. The ship is a means to fulfill this need, which is often to get something that is lacking, often food. The exchange is then made in whatever the shipbuilding society can provide, but it is almost always the society with a need that sets sails, whereas the society with a material surplus will not, as it does not have the need to invest in costly ships. The story of the Greek settlement in the Mediterranean and the trade network that spawned from it is a telling tale of this principle that also repeats later in history.